mysterious voice you hear is my girlfriend Melissa, sitting just off camera.
Isel, something that surprised me about you when we first got together was the fact that you were interested in economics. And I think stereotypically people who are interested in languages and religion may not be the most economically oriented people, or the people who care about money or finance and, this type of
And
topic.
let me just say, one of the social contexts in which this emerges and becomes obvious is, for example, that her dad can't push me around about economics, right? And my own father, when he was alive, could not push me around about economics. I think many people, your family dynamic, whether you're talking about politics or your own personal life, actually the younger generation being pushed around by the older generation because of the assumption that the older generation knows more about economics. I think it's actually a common theme. I think it's a common family dynamic. But yeah, that was probably one of the most striking situations in which you noticed it. But it's true also just living in an apartment with me and walking around. There's a lot of commentary about economics.
I would say as we've walked around different places in the world, one of your comments that you always say is, invest now, like in places that look really run down, just as a joke you say that. But, it's not so much a joke because that's
often
really,
it was sincere. Where we were living when we were first together, I was really commenting a lot on how the economy was changing there. They were building a new railroad. There were things fundamentally changed with the economy, and I was often saying, look, invest now because we know what's going to happen here. That is true. So actually, when we were first together, it wasn't a joke. Maybe some other time, like when we were in Detroit or something, I was making some jokes.
Well, but no, that's true. I just wanted to say maybe it's not so much a joke because so much of your life has been about places that are basically economic disasters.
Yes, that's true.
You spent a lot of time in Laos and Cambodia, places that are notoriously impoverished, and you actually chose to live in poverty. You had many options, I think, when you were first starting university, what you wanted to study. And
certainly, moving to Cambodia was not the most obvious option at the end of my university degree, but yes,
right. So yeah,
I had options other than that. Yeah, right.
I mean, this is an anecdote of yours, but I wanted to share it because I found it interesting and it relates to this topic. Yeah. After you graduated from university, you used to do lectures at high schools.
Yes. So just to be clear, this wasn't a very long period of my life, but in Canada, there was a special program to make sure that other religious groups were represented within the Catholic schools and Christian schools. So they would pay someone who was a Buddhist to give lectures on the history of Buddhism. I think they'd also pay a Hindu, like they'd pay some number of people like that to come in and give some kind of representative lecture. And at that time, I already had the credentials to go and represent Buddhism. So yeah, I forget, it was maybe 6 lectures, like it was something like that. It wasn't a huge number. It wasn't some vast lecture tour. Yeah, it was an interesting experience right when I was at the end of my BA at the University of Toronto. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely, I think, a valuable experience for somebody that's just graduating from university.
And they paid in cash. Speaking of, I was paid. The Canadian school board system did pay me for those lectures. So,
wow.
Yeah. Unlike the lectures I give now on YouTube, but hey, yeah.
So the anecdote you shared with me the other day was that a student in your class, she heard that you had been to Italy. Oh,
yes, right. She actually just asked. She just demanded. Yeah, maybe she thought I looked Italian or something. I don't know why. She was Italian. Yeah, but go on.
And she was really surprised that you were planning to go live
I was
in
planning to live in
Asia.
Cambodia, etc. at that time already, right? Yeah.
She said, you've been to Italy. Don't you want to live in Italy?
Right.
Thinking that it's paradise.
Right.
But you instead chose to live in a place that is, I mean, I'm not saying Italy is the best in terms of economics, but is better and more.
I had a question from a student in the audience, and she did regard Italy as paradise. And the question was, why wouldn't you want to go live a month with olive oil in Italy or something?
Yeah. So I just think this is an interesting aspect of your character, that you've chosen to live in impoverished conditions. And also that when you began studying at university, your intention was to study economics, but not for the typical reason that people would study economics.
Right. So that's the way in which it makes sense, is you can say that what I did at the end of university was actually very similar to my aspirations at the beginning. So when I enrolled in economics, what I was interested in was the philosophy of poverty. And I was interested in doing work linked to post-war reconstruction, the emergence out of poverty and kind of post-war and devastated conditions. And one of the examples I was interested in was South Korea. Now, I would not have said this in these terms at the time, but it's interesting. I've heard many people say this after visiting South Korea, including the YouTuber Onision. It was actually a big turning point in his life when he moved to South Korea. And I forget, there was another YouTuber recently I heard who was an American. Oh, yeah, it was a left-wing extremist. It was a left-wing anarchist extremist. And he said that for him, this turning point was going to South Korea and realizing he had been raised with the doctrine that America was the greatest country in the world. And he got to South Korea and he just decided it's not true. So South Korea, for me, was an example of a country that had very recently and very rapidly emerged from poverty. And it created a society that was at least as good as Canada, probably better in every way that matters, including, most obvious to me, the level of education I found to be higher than Canada. The things I cared about seemed to be better in South Korea than in Canada. And I was interested in the mystery of why can South Korea do that and not Cambodia, or not yet. Cambodia hasn't done it yet. Cambodia hasn't bounced back yet. And indeed, also, though, why South Korea and not Canada? Why South Korea and not Detroit? Why South Korea and not Ireland? Today Ireland is actually quite affluent, but at that time Ireland was, still in a reconstruction phase itself and so on. So that question, so the philosophy of poverty, and if you want to make a difference in the world, do you want to make a difference catering to the rich and wealthy and working at the top, or do you want to make a difference at the bottom? Just pragmatically, it seems almost inevitable that people will focus at the bottom one way or another, if you're sincere about making a difference in the world. There are exceptions. I've said this on the channel before. If you want to do something like environmental science, it's kind of inevitably elitist. It involves catering to elites and expensive research and expensive lobbying for government policy and so on. But I felt most of the things I cared about, they had to do with the poor and poverty and these questions. So yeah, in that sense, what I did at the end of university was actually quite similar to what I did at the beginning. But at the beginning, I enrolled in economics looking for the philosophy of poverty. And instead, what I found were, I said at the time, I remember I said this to my parents and I said this to kind of anyone who would listen. I said, only now that I've been in the Department of Economics do I understand, who buys Rufinol. So Rufinol was an illegal drug used at that time for date rape, to drug women and take advantage of them. I was like, I could never imagine who it was that would actually do this before, but I found myself in the classroom with people I considered utterly despicable. Nobody else was there for the philosophy of poverty. People were there to get rich quick, to get an imaginary job as a stockbroker, financier, investment advisor. Probably their idea of that was based on watching movies from the 1980s that very much glamorized the life of a stockbroker. It's, not what they're going to get. Nobody else was in the classroom with those intentions. And the intentions of the professors were also pretty awful. The quality of English spoken was abominably low. I was often in classes where at least 30% of the students spoke Chinese as their first language, and the teaching assistant couldn't speak English. They were a new immigrant from China or Korea themselves. There were a lot of things obviously wrong with it, and also what was presumed was that everyone was already beginning this course at a very high level of mathematical ability I had not gained in high school or from my parents or what have you. They weren't going to teach you math. They were just going to punish you for not already knowing university level economics, math, the equation side of it. So it was a really bad situation I found myself in. But above all else, it just philosophically, morally, ethically, the purpose of education they were giving you had nothing to do with my reasons for studying economics. And I should clarify, this does not have to do with the difference between macro and microeconomics. It doesn't. I'm genuinely interested in microeconomics also. And that distinction really comes from John Maynard Keynes and the Keynesian view of economics. It's like everything else, it's kind of an unreal and self-serving distinction. But microeconomics meaning how particular businesses work or particular segments of the economy. So to give an example, why is it that almost no clothing is made in America anymore? That's a microeconomic problem, right? Why is it that Americans, almost all the clothes they wear are imported from China or Bangladesh or India or even Europe, but remarkably small percentage of American clothing is made in factories in America. Remarkably small percentage of textiles, when you can get into that. So maybe just one stage of the process. That's all very interesting to me too. But my approach it's fundamentally humanitarian in outlook. Like, I'm interested in that for humanitarian reasons. I'm interested in making the world a better place. And obviously, if you're in a room full of people who are, at that time it was day trading in tech stocks and stuff. It was crap, like the stupid get-rich-quick schemes and how to flip houses on the real estate market or something. If these are the dominant passions, if this is the purpose of education and so on, or this is what the credential is for. And then I guess the other great fascination was the extent to which computers could now analyze the behavior of the stock market, and people can convince themselves. It's like gambling. People can convince themselves they've figured out the system, the secret relationship between the numbers, when there's a computer doing analysis of the stock market on an automated basis. It's even more. So yeah, it was, I was in the wrong place for all the right reasons. I found myself in a department of economics, where my motivations had nothing to do with the teachers or the students there. However, economics as a science, as a social science, I mean that. There's no sarcasm on my part when I talk about economics. So it is a science. And also economics as a philosophy and economics as a kind of theater of political critique. That was a tremendously meaningful part of my life before I started university, like already in high school. And it remained a tremendously important part of my life during university and after. I never gave up on it, and it never gave up on me. So you can imagine, if you just have a kind of sophisticated education in economics, you really do understand the basics. For one thing, you're immune to many of the fads of left-wing ideology that have come and gone. I'm also immune to the fads of right-wing ideology. You may not have noticed that on the channel. Ridiculous ideas about libertarianism and stuff that I find laughable. So, it helps you in that way negatively. But this, of course, also made me very different from the average person who majors in Buddhism. The average person who meditates and decides to study the Dharma. The way in which I understood, again, just in simple terms, what had happened in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos after World War II or something. Any example. How I understood what happened in India under the British Empire. The sense of economic realism and being able to do economic analysis for any and every period of history and scrutinize things that way. That made me really different from the people around me in each of these theaters of research or academic endeavor. It made me different from the other people in Asian studies at UVic. Another interesting contrast, this is jumping ahead many, many years, back when I was married to an anthropologist. I was with her and I was with other people in departments of cultural anthropology. And I was at a much higher level of economic literacy and economic analysis than they were. So again, their discipline was anthropology, but as you can imagine, very often what they wanted to deal with were economic abstractions and generalizations and so on. So yeah, again, I just read a book in front of you. Just literally today, I read a new textbook that came out in economics. I'm still really interested in economics. Even the book reviews I did on Bernie Sanders or something shows me cross-examining what's going on in terms of current economic theory and philosophy and the way in which that's packaged into economic critique of what's going on politically and proposals for new policy packages, try to make the world a better place. I never lost my interest in that. And it's remained a tremendously meaningful and rewarding part of my life. And let's be all the way real about it. Let's be all the way honest about it. That's not true of Buddhism. Buddhism didn't remain meaningful in my life that way. You could say that about other specific philosophies. I don't feel the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer was tremendously meaningful in my life long term. It was interesting at a certain time in my life for certain reasons, and then you move on, and that's it. But I've read innumerable books of philosophy, and I've studied many chapters of history that really just have a kind of very limited significance or meaning in my life. And, you build up some sophistication by studying one period of history after another, one culture after another, so on and so forth. But nevertheless, Economics. It could be called kind of the queen of the sciences this way, because it's the science that kind of rules over all the other sciences and pervades the discussion of all the other sciences. I mean, but to give an example that comes up here, we often discuss things in nutritional science or even in psychology, where you have to come to the conclusion, the answer to this question isn't unknowable. It's just unknown because the research would cost millions of dollars and wouldn't be rewarding and so on. So in that sense also, economics shapes the other research that gets done and doesn't get done. It shapes what messages get promoted, whether through advertising or by the government and propaganda, and which don't. That sense of economic expediency shaping the world around it, or the world around us. It shapes the way history is written. It shapes what gets remembered and what gets forgotten, and so on and so forth. So the profit motive tugging at human nature in every which way. Yeah, it's been one of the most meaningful parts of my life, and it's also interesting. I mean, I think the first thing I said, I think you can appreciate that too. I think that the study of economics allows us to stand up to our own parents. It was true within my own unique family. Your family's totally different, but I think it matters. Very often, as young adults or whatever, we have to stand up and justify why some venture or another is worth the money, or the decisions we have to make, or whatever. I mean, being able to give a robust, explanation of what you're doing and why in terms of economics. Again, both microeconomics and macroeconomics, I think it's important in our own lives in that way too. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. No, I love that response. I credit you with my introduction to economics. Really, I never took an economics class in university. And of course, I think it is a flaw in the American education system that students are not required to take even like a personal finance course.
Right.
But in reality, economics governs everything in our lives, and it's both visible and invisible every day.
Right.
Whether it's your choice to just to be able to see the economics and everything, or how everything is
Right.
Yeah, it's all intertwined. So
well, I mean,
with money.
Right.
Money is.
Why did Napoleon invade Egypt?
Right.
Now, of course, racism is an aspect. It is,
Sure.
Religion is an aspect, but it's a little bit more paradoxical than you might at first think if you look into that. Napoleon actually openly promised to convert to Islam. He was going to become Muslim so he could be the emperor of Egypt. That was part of his plan. He changed his name to Napoleon Ali. Not making this up. You could use words like Orientalism, the idea of going there and doing archaeology and turning up mysteries from the past, which they did. I mean, that wasn't a complete delusion. But yes, very fundamentally, you have to understand it in terms of economics. What was the idea? That the French Empire would become wealthier, and also that they would make the British Empire poorer. There was this competition between empires. That was what drove it. So I mean, many of these things, there's a fundamental economic rationale, even if it's completely false, even if it's a ridiculous delusion. That has to be understood. To flip forward 100 years or more, I guess more than 100 years, why did France try to conquer and colonize Cambodia? Ridiculous notion. But of course, I mean, kind of whether you deal with it first or last, the answer is going to be the ineluctable answer is going to be economics, even if you want to talk about other ideological categories like racism and so on. They matter to some extent too. But it's going to begin and end, I think, with economics. Yeah, the queen of the sciences.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I could say, just to talk a little bit on that point, it is true we grew up, on completely different opposite spectrums.
Right.
Your parents had a very far left ideology.
Her father is basically a stereotypical Donald Trump supporter. Basically.
Yep.
Right.
Right wing.
Right.
I worked hard for my money.
Right.
And he was always, for me, I felt like he was like I'm sorry, I don't want to speak bad, but he was like kind of like the Mr. Krabs stereotype, like things. So it was about money.
This is a reference to the cartoon SpongeBob.
Like life is about money. Life is about earning money, and
Right.
to be an adult means earning
Right.
money and supporting yourself, supporting a family.
Right.
And of course, like part of me wanted to fight back against that, and I just never cared. I just didn't feel myself motivated by money. I felt
Right.
myself motivated by something else in my life. Like I wanted something more than money. So that was kind of like the introduction with my introduction to economics was basically like, okay, earn enough to survive and, do whatever else you want to do out of your life that's meaningful. So yeah, I don't know. It is interesting that you grew up in this far left setting environment.
Well, I think too. So in my culture, I mean, I come from Canada, but very similar to the northern United States at least. Right. There's an assumption that anyone on the left will be sort of pointedly ignorant about economics. Like they're almost intentionally and over the top ignorant about economics. Left wingers, they love to throw up their hands and pretend that like the stock market just doesn't make any sense. Like, interest rates just don't make any, it's just incomprehensible and therefore capitalism is going to collapse because it's just so hard to understand. That's like, if you spent just 2 weeks studying this stuff, do you really think, what do you think's harder to understand? Like textbook economics or how to play the piano? To play the piano well, is that minimum 100 hours of practice? I don't know. Come up with your own estimate. But, I don't know. If you can get over your sense of aversion and fear, 100 hours would be a long time to study. Really it's the history of economics you learn from. But, obviously to also pick up some of the jargon and principles and understand in what context that jargon was invented and what purpose it served, and maybe now today we use the term differently and assumptions have shifted. It's, as I say, it's a science you want to understand in that kind of diachronic historical fashion, a science with shifting assumptions. But this is even true of medical science, by the way. The meaning of the word bile has changed. Believe it or not, the concept of the humors of the body and so on, the meaning of the assumptions about blood pressure and fiber in your diet, we use the same terms, but they're used in a different way as time goes on. But anyway, more dramatically, obviously, within a 30-year period, what's done in economics really changes. But when I was with my blonde ex-girlfriend, so she's been referred to, she was my girlfriend. We really got serious in the last year of university when I was a normal age university student decades ago. But, I think she definitely had the assumption that I was a left-wing person who came from a left-wing family and that I would therefore share in this sort of self-righteous incomprehension at anything to do with business, anything to do with the stock market, just pretending to be too pure to care about business.
Yeah, that's for evil capitalists.
Right, and scoffing. Well, actually, an example, some people on the left have finally given this up, but when I was a kid, this was way more common, just scoffing at the idea that deficits matter, that debt matters, that government responsibility for how much, that just, only some kind of right-wing fundamentalist could possibly imagine that the government going bankrupt is a problem. As if there's any limit to how much money the government could spend. So, I think a good comparison would be the way some right-wing people, definitely now in the United States of America, many right-wing people just profess their total incomprehension of ecology, of environmentalism. As if anyone could possibly try to quantify how much air pollution there is or how much pollution there is in rivers and try to control it through policy.
Humans can't possibly affect the whole world is so vast. And
suddenly they get real unscientific when we're moving into a science that's contrary to their their ideological objectives. So there's something similar there with left-wingers. And the surprise was, so my blonde girlfriend, we were together for many years, I forget. But gradually she learned to really respect, like, whoa, your understanding of economics is kind of like a key that unlocks a lot of kind of practical mysteries around us.
Yeah.
She lived with me in several totally different cultural settings. Hong Kong, bizarre economic situation, Thailand, and then we moved to Laos together. Yeah, we also lived in Taiwan together, actually, she and I. And, in each of those, I'm kind of making different observations and analyses of what's going on now and how that reflects what happened over the last 50 years. So Melissa also has now been with me for years, and everywhere we go, there's this kind of analysis of what's going right and what's going wrong.
That's right. Yeah, recently we met with your mother, and she asked me, did I like Thailand?
Right.
It's this very broad question.
Right.
And I ended up saying it was an interesting experience being in Thailand because it's both the most impoverished place that I've seen and the most wealthy. Just fabulously extravagant money in the malls, so it's this dichotomy. But I grew up in the Detroit area. I mean, I got to see a real economic disaster growing up. So one might think that I would have more interest in economics.
She got to see that economic theory has real world consequences in Detroit.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I really appreciate that this aspect of your character, this interest in economics, and I think, like your blonde ex-girlfriend said, that it really does hold the key to many of the problems in society that seem incomprehensible or seem confusing for a lot of people.
Right.
And I think, like what I experienced before, just like hating money or like hating the fact that I needed to earn money. I think this is a very immature, childish kind of view of things. Like that, I wish I could live on the basics provided, and because I'm not an extravagant person, and I think we both agree on this. We're both kind of I'm a cheapskate, So yeah, I just say it moving beyond it being just something like, oh, I hate money, I love money, rather instead saying money is this thing that is the key to.
Well, I mean, I'd say this: there's a difference between saying earning money is the meaning of life and saying the study of money is meaningful and exposes to you what's going on around you in life.
It improves your understanding of the world around
when
you.
we first got here, when we were first coming to, sorry, I said here, when we first got to Taiwan, there was this incident where the farmers were giving away cabbage for free.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, in a simple sense like this, it's really meaningful to study, okay, what's going on in agriculture where you're living and how does that shape the world around you? So when Melissa and I lived together in Yunnan, China, and right away you notice it's this really strange economy linked to agriculture. They farm some crops like coffee, they farm strawberries, and the strawberry economy, for 1 month of the year, the town is completely drowned in strawberries, and there are none.
That's right.
There's boom and bust, and you see the way the mango market shifts. There's sometimes when they're importing mangoes, and sometimes they're exporting mangoes, and in this way, as I say, the study of money, the study of where money comes from, where it goes, and how the economy around you functions, it is very, very meaningful. But that doesn't mean that I think earning as much money as possible is the meaning of my life or anyone's life, really.
Yeah. Well, I just thank you for this
Okay.
video. I think it was really interesting, and I appreciate that you recorded it after my suggestion.
Okay, guys, so I'll give the link below the video. Melissa does have her own YouTube channel, rarely uploaded to now, but no, I think in the months ahead, I think you're going to see some new videos on Melissa's channel too. Check it out. Hey, Mudan.